Dear Wendy, I'm letting my bangs grow. After all, I want to look my absolute best when I go to court and see Paul. I want him to drool when he sees me.
All eyes are now on accused killer Paul Bernardo in a downtown.
The jury will hear from Karla Homolka.
In July 1995, Paul Bernardo went on trial in Toronto for the abduction, rape, and murder of teenagers Leslie Mahaffy and Kristen French.
Videotapes said to depict chilling.
The prosecution's star witness, his former wife, Karla Homolka, already in prison for her part in those crimes and in the death of her sister.
It's all part of a deal she struck with the Crown in exchange for one thing: her testimony against Paul Bernardo.
Homolka's appearance has always belied the seriousness of her crimes, and so does her demeanor. In police interview tapes obtained by the Fifth Estate, she describes her role as both victimizer and victim.
If I didn't turn the water tap off completely, he'd hit me. If I didn't say the right thing, he'd hit me. He held knives to my throat. He told me I better watch my back. He said, always watch your back with me. Her feet were tied with that electrical cord that he had used to kill Leslie. And there was electrical cord around her neck. He anally raped her, and then he strangled her after he was done. It stands out really clear in my mind because the night before I left him, he did the exact same thing to me, only he didn't kill me.
This was the Karla Homolka presented by police and prosecutors, a victim deserving of leniency. Homolka also convinced a legion of psychiatrists that she had committed unspeakable crimes only because she was battered into it by an abusive husband. Leniency she got through a controversial plea bargain endorsed by Ontario's Attorney General. The arrangement was made in secret by men whose interests coincided. As a result, her psychiatric assessments were never tested in court. If they'd been publicly scrutinized, we might have had a glimpse of a different Karla Homolka, the one who appears when those psychiatric diagnoses are stripped away. Dr. Fred Berlin is an authority on criminal behavior.
I don't accept the battered women's syndrome. That's not what this was about. This is about innocent people suffering, people who had done absolutely nothing that would justify Karla lashing out or doing something that would hurt them. To make the leap from being battered and getting back at your batterer to killing innocent victims is a leap that I'm not prepared to make.
I considered her to be very dangerous.
Mary Hall was a Crown prosecutor involved in the case.
I had some real doubts about the battered spouse syndrome and the fact that she had been acting under duress in relation to what she admitted she did.
Karla Homolka is an enigma, seemingly able to conjure a range of personalities. Police, prosecutors, and psychiatrists saw a vulnerable young woman, and a half a dozen confidential psychiatric reports explained her criminal behavior by suggesting she'd been terrorized into committing crimes she'd found abhorrent. One of those reports was done by Dr. Andrew Malcolm. He suggested Bernardo had Homolka under his spell almost from the beginning.
She was a naive, simple, innocent, helpless child who was impressed by what her parents thought of her catch and what her little girlfriends thought of her catch. She was overwhelmed by this fellow.
But people close to her remember a strong-willed Karla Homolka, an independent young woman who worked part-time in a pet store. In her high school clique called the Diamond Club, Homolka was #1, according to member Kathy Ford and her husband Alex.
She was the tough one of our friendships. And you didn't want to get in a fight with Karla because she was going to win.
Leader or follower, Ms. Homolka?
Leader.
Leader. Yeah. Definitely.
It was an unlikely setting for a romantic encounter, a pet food show at a suburban hotel. But it was here that 17-year-old Homolka met a handsome 23-year-old junior accountant named Paul Bernardo. The attraction was instant, says Homolka's co-worker, Jenny Black.
Oh, he was her knight in shining armor. And I mean, we looked at him like that. He treated her well. He took care of her. He took her places. He just seemed to be wonderful for her. She was in love, head over heels.
Their home video documents a holiday Bernardo and Homolka took in Florida in the summer of 1988. They look like any other happy, goofy young couple in love. Later, Homolka would tell her psychiatrist Bernardo was already tightening his grip and that he'd begun hitting her.
Karla told me that she had been physically abused by him, but a very important element in that abuse is psychological abuse, which doesn't leave any marks on the body whatsoever. She was rendered helpless by him in the course of the first 6 or 7 or so months of their association.
But in what way was she rendered helpless by him in the first 7 months? Because people said they were in love and happy together, she was living at home. How did he render her helpless in the first 7 months?
She became dependent on him. He controlled her. He advised her that she was worthless.
But Jenny Black says she saw no signs of it.
No, I didn't notice anything, no. I was happy for her.
And did she seem happy?
She seemed very happy. And he seemed very happy. I mean, they were all over each other when they were together. They were just together.
They certainly were. But Homolka convinced her psychiatrist she'd been sexually abused by Bernardo, suggesting their kinky sex life was not consensual. Their friends at the time remember it differently.
They had a little dog chain too, like a dog necklace with the little spikes on, not spikes, but you know, little.
A dog collar.
Dog collar. And
that she wore.
That she wore. Very submissive.
And interestingly enough, you'd walk into a room and in the back door would be a lace teddy and a pair of handcuffs.
Did she talk about this in a horrible way, like, I hate this kind of sex we're having?
No.
What did she say about it?
It was just matter of fact.
It was just the best thing in the world.
In December 1989, the best thing in Homolka's world got better. In a rhapsodic letter to the Toronto Star, Homolka described the romantic evening by Niagara Falls when Bernardo proposed.
She wanted to marry this man. This was her man, and she was going to marry him, and that was that.
7 months before the wedding, the man who would be Homolka's perfect husband was called in by police for questioning in a series of rapes in Scarborough near Toronto. Homolka knew her future perfect husband was a perfect match for the police composite. She also knew her fiancé was obsessed with attractive teenage girls, including one Karla Homolka knew very well. It was her 15-year-old sister, Tammy. Bernardo convinced Karla to help him satisfy his obsession with Tammy by aiding him in a clandestine sexual assault on the teenager. Homolka didn't lift a finger to save her sister from Bernardo.
He was being physically and verbally abusive to me at that time, as you know. He kept on pushing and pushing and pushing, and finally I said okay. And thinking that it wouldn't be, you know, it would just be one time, that's it. It would shut him up, and he would stop bothering me and stop hurting me.
This Christmas video was shot just hours before the attack.
Are you in the Christmas cheer? That's all I want to know.
Tammy is already woozy from tranquilizer-spiked drinks that would soon render her unconscious. While being sexually assaulted by her big sister and Bernardo, Tammy would choke and die.
Ice baby to go?
At the time, the couple's lies convinced police Tammy's death was an accident, but it would return to haunt Karla.
She offered up her sister in order to keep happy the man she wanted to marry.
Yes.
Offering up her sister is not explainable by battered wife syndrome. She was living at home at the time. They weren't married.
Well, I don't think she was a full-blown battered wife at that point, but I think the earliest beginnings of it were already underway. She was already falling into his thrall at that point. That was my opinion when I saw her, that she was, in fact, an influenced person.
Influenced person. That's not battered wife syndrome at that time. What was she suffering from, if anything, at the time she offered up her sister to be sexually assaulted, videotaped, and to be put in jeopardy, which eventually killed her?
I can't really answer that. I think that it was an outrageous act.
Karla Homolka herself has told a number of stories about her state of mind at the time of Tammy's death. In an audio-taped interview with police before she became implicated in the murders, she says the couple's first 3 years were happy ones.
It was great. It was really good. It was pretty well the same all the way through, except we became emotionally closer. And there were never any problems, or very rarely any problems. We had a couple of arguments, but just normal arguments.
In fact, she moved in with Bernardo and, seeming to forget her sister's death, continued her pre-wedding social whirl of showers, fittings, and parties.
Yeah. All right.
Who's ever dominant in this relationship?
At the end of June 1991, Homolka married the man she would later claim had abused her so badly. As Homolka and Bernardo paraded their union through the storybook town of Niagara-on-the-Lake, a nightmare was discovered in nearby Lake Gibson. Entombed in 8 concrete blocks, the dismembered body of 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffy. What no one knew was that the newlyweds were already bound by ties stronger than marriage, the killing of 2 innocent teenage girls.
And then she took a breath. And that freaked me out even more.
When we return, Homolka tells police about the murders.
So he went over to her and he did the same thing. He strangled her more. And I think I watched that time, because what the hell, she's dead anyway.
Homolka's evidence was that 2 weeks before the wedding, Bernardo had awakened her with the news he'd kidnapped a teenage girl and brought her home. Homolka's response was to go back to sleep. The next day, while Bernardo raped Leslie Mahaffy in the guest room, Homolka passed the time reading and walking their dog, Buddy. Homolka was upset, but not for Mahaffy.
Oh, and I was really mad too, because when I took Buddy out, there were 2 champagne glasses on the dining room table. And we had these really expensive champagne glasses from France, which we never used. He had those out. The 2 of them had been drinking champagne from those glasses. And I was really mad. It was a stupid little thing.
Homolka seemed matter-of-fact as she recounted her version of how Leslie Mahaffy met her death.
And then she took a breath. And that freaked me out even more. He should have slapped me in the face, because I was really hysterical then. So he went over to her and he did the same thing. He strangled her more. And I think I watched that time, because what the hell, she's dead anyway. Like.
There's my wife.
2 weeks later, they were married and went on their honeymoon. Homolka later claimed to police and psychiatrists that Bernardo had cruelly destroyed her wedding night by telling her he was the Scarborough rapist. Although she'd already been involved in 2 deaths, Homolka would call this the worst night of her life.
He wasn't loving. He acted like he didn't care that we got married. He told me that he was a Scarborough rapist. And it just was not like the kind of wedding night that girls dreamed about having.
After the honeymoon, Homolka told police the marriage went well. There was nothing for quite a while, just small verbal arguments and things. And every day she labored over love notes for Bernardo's pillow, including this one, written just before they kidnapped Kristen French.
It's Easter soon, and do you know what that means? A day off for Carly Curls to spend with her wonderful king. Isn't that great? Love you.
He kept saying, go through what we're going to do. So I said, well, if we see a girl, we're going to stop. I'm going to ask her for directions. I'm going to try and get her over to the car.
As Kristen French was on her way home from school for the long Easter weekend, they put their plan into effect.
So he wanted her right beside him so he could hold the knife to her. And I sat in the back seat, actually more in the middle of the two of the front seats, and I held her hair and I held her head down.
French was taken to the couple's home near St. Catharines. Homolka unplugged the phones, closed the blinds, and locked the doors. 3 days of sexual degradation of the 15-year-old schoolgirl had begun. When Bernardo left on an errand, Homolka didn't release Kristen. Instead, while guarding the bound teenager with a rubber mallet, she carried on what she described as a chat between girlfriends.
I never should have gotten to know Kristen, because you get emotionally involved with these people, and it really hurts. It hurts a lot more, because I felt like I was friends with both of them, especially Kristen, because we did so much stuff together. We put makeup on together, we talked, you know, just girl talk when Paul was gone getting us food, and it just made it hurt even more.
2 weeks later, the frantic search for the teenager came to an end. No one suspected it was the attractive young couple next door, who, with 3 killings behind them, were beginning to unravel. Now, friends often saw bruises on Homolka, but said nothing. Then, just after Christmas, he gave her a savage beating that left marks no one could ignore. The beating left her head swollen. The doctor described her blackened eyes as resembling a raccoon and said it was the worst case of abuse he'd ever seen. But within weeks, Homolka had recovered, and within a month she'd filed for divorce, hit the bars, and taken a lover. Karla Homolka's exciting life as a newly single woman came to an abrupt end in February 1993. Almost 2.5 years after they questioned Bernardo, the police now had DNA results confirming that he was the Scarborough rapist. Officers located Homolka, and she was cooperative until she realized they had connected her husband to the Mahaffy and French murders. That meant Karla Homolka was in trouble, too. Homolka headed straight for Niagara Falls and criminal lawyer George Walker. She told him her version of what happened to Tammy, Leslie, and Kristen.
Were you broadsided by what she said that day?
Basically, yeah. And but not broadsided enough to figure out that I'd better get to somebody quick.
You thought she might be arrested quickly?
Certainly did.
So you had to make a move?
I had to make a move, and the quandary I wanted to make the right move.
Walker didn't even need to pick up the phone. Police were on his doorstep that same night, wanting to make a deal.
Guys, okay. Back up, please.
After 9 months and $11 million, all they had against
please.
Bernardo was Homolka. But the community wanted an arrest, and Bernardo was picked up.
Your world stops for a second. You can't believe. I cried when they found Kristen. I cried with Leslie. And then to find out it was somebody that I knew and trusted.
Homolka wanted to avoid punishment and asked Walker to seek blanket immunity for her role in the crimes. Walker and the head of the Crown Law Office, Murray Siegel, started to bargain in local restaurants. Walker already knew the card he would play.
You believe she was abused from the beginning?
Yeah, I do.
And did you tell Murray Siegel that when you started negotiating, that it was a mitigating factor?
Yes.
You did?
I did.
So the two of you had discussed that prior to any psychiatrist confirming a diagnosis of this?
Yes.
Was there physical evidence beside the raccoon eyes that you saw that would...
Yes.
What was there?
I'm not,
And you had something besides her word?
Yes.
Police had begun an intensive search of the couple's home. They discovered a profoundly disturbing 2-minute video. The man in charge of the investigation, Inspector Vince Bevan, was on the scene.
And my understanding of that tape is that in the scene with the woman that you believe to be Kristen French, Karla Homolka is enjoying herself.
Mm-hmm. Certainly gives that impression.
Having sex with an unconscious girl.
Mm-hmm.
And you thought that was Kristen French.
We thought that, well, we thought it could be.
But what you knew from that tape is that she was having sex with an unconscious girl and liking it. Didn't that shade your view of her enough to question going ahead with that first deal?
Did we want to do this or did we need to do this? We were in a situation where we needed to do it.
A few days after the home movie was found, Walker and Homolka met. Notes from the meeting show Walker was concerned about witnesses coming forward to give examples of kinky sex, and we both felt that the beatings and abuse she suffered would only go so far. Shortly after that, Homolka was hospitalized for 7 weeks at Northwestern Hospital in Toronto. Dr. Hans Arndt was engaged by Walker to make a psychiatric assessment. Dr. Arndt concluded Homolka's experience since age 17 equaled that of a concentration camp survivor. A psychologist concluded that Homolka was herself a victim. To add weight to those assessments, Walker brought in a respected forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Andrew Malcolm.
This girl was convincing to me when I saw her. She gave me an outline of abuse going back for some 5 years, and she was extraordinarily convincing as she gave me this story.
What evidence did you have that there were other instances of battering? What corroboration did you have for that?
None at all.
She had been involved in the deaths of 3 people. Isn't someone in that circumstance going to be self-serving? Aren't they going to put the best shading on it that they can?
Oh, but of course, people are self-serving, and they want to make themselves look as good as they can. Although I've been fooled before, now, and I might have been fooled by Karla too, but I don't think so.
You don't?
No.
Is 4 hours enough time to have spent with her?
Sure it is. You can tell somebody is lying in a very few minutes.
Dr. Fred Berlin of Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore has reviewed the psychiatric reports and much of the other evidence in this case. He's concerned some of Homolka's stories weren't corroborated.
The Crown presumably believed that they needed Karla's evidence in order to get at Paul, and therefore wanted support for the idea of having her as a witness. As a psychiatrist, I have concerns that they supported that through psychiatric evidence that I feel is very lacking in credibility.
Walker and Siegel met over dinner at Auberge du Pommier in Toronto. With the psychiatric assessments completed, Homolka's deal was finalized. She would get 12 years, 10 each for French and Mahaffy to be served concurrently. She got just 2 years for Tammy and was never charged in her sister's death.
I don't know how you can put that in years. How do you put it in terms? It seemed like Tammy was like a clause or an extra throw-in just to make sure that wouldn't become an issue in future cases. And I just feel that that's so sad that someone who was loved by so many people has been so pushed under the carpet and been left behind.
When we return, we'll examine Homolka's role in the killings.
He wanted to keep her for longer, and I didn't want to. Like, I was going to work. I didn't want to go to work knowing that this girl was in my house and she could escape so easily, and I was afraid.
To this day, there are troubling questions about Karla Homolka's involvement in the death of her little sister, Tammy. Karla Homolka's motive for participating in the drugging, rape, and killing of her own flesh and blood might defy even the most exotic psychiatric diagnosis. Inexplicably, Tammy's body wasn't exhumed until 2 weeks after Karla Homolka's plea bargain and sentence had been sanctioned by a judge. Even so, through her autopsy report, Tammy Homolka would testify from the grave against her older sister. Tammy was just 15 years old when she died.
He talked about how he really liked her, how she was getting really cute, things like that at first. And I would say, yeah, she is, because she was a beautiful girl.
Tammy was becoming a rival for Bernardo's affections. Karla had told her lawyer, George Walker, about a pool party in 1990 when Bernardo and Tammy disappeared for hours. I was very angry because I looked foolish because everybody left the party before they got back. I was alone outside waiting, angry, drinking wine. She then admitted something she never admitted to police and would deny under oath, that she was a little bit jealous of Tammy. Karla claimed she was battered into the assault on Tammy, but she told her friends something more sinister.
This was her wedding present.
This was her way of saying, here's your...
Keep Paul to marry her?
That's what she told us after.
That's what she told us.
The plan was for me to get sleeping pills. And so I picked the Halcyon. It seemed to have the least side effects, and death was not listed.
In fact, the compendium of pharmaceuticals Homolka reviewed is replete with warnings of potentially lethal outcomes when the drug is misused. In combination with alcohol, it may cause severe central nervous system depression. Tammy's dose was served in cocktails and combined with a powerful general anesthetic.
I don't remember who decided that we needed the halothane. I guess it would probably be me, knowing more about anesthetics and the fact that sleeping pills might not keep her completely asleep.
The CPS warns that non-clinical use of halothane, which she stole from the vet clinic where she worked, is dangerous. Nausea, vomiting, and cardiac arrest are among the adverse effects. Her lawyer's notes reveal she knew that what she was about to do was dangerous. That was another fact she denied under oath. But she did let slip to police that she'd covered her tracks.
What I did, this was my idea, not his, was to call the drugstore and tell them that I needed it for clinic use. The reason I told them for clinic use was because that way I didn't have to give a name. All I had to do was give a doctor's name.
Hi, Tam.
The night of the attack, Karla watched as Tammy grew woozy from the halcyon-laced after-dinner drinks. Karla knew that combination, plus the anesthetic halothane on a full stomach, were risky. When Tammy passed out, Karla held a halothane-soaked cloth over her sister's mouth during the assault. Tammy choked on vomit and stopped breathing. She couldn't be revived. Two coroners who reviewed the case, one officially and one for the Fifth Estate, believe there was enough halothane on the cloth to have caused this burn on Tammy's face.
Those burns are possibly chemical in nature and antemortem.
The only chemical that was near her was the halothane. It was not placed on her face directly. It was held, as I said, like this far away.
Homolka is lying to police. A videotape of the assault recovered later clearly shows Homolka holding the soaked cloth either very close to or directly on Tammy's face. The coroner's report done when Tammy's body was exhumed makes that lie especially significant. The report suggests, among other things, that she may have been smothered during the application of halothane to her face. A condition of Homolka's deal is that she'd not stop the life of any of the girls.
Why didn't you have those facts available for the sentencing?
Because nothing turned on it. There was nothing material that was going to change what happened with Homolka as the result of the exhumation of Tammy's body.
But I thought her deal stipulated that if she stopped the breath of any of the girls, the deal was off.
Mm-hmm.
So he's saying it looks like she stopped the breath of her sister.
Contributed to her death.
Not contributing. The report says that Tammy Homolka died as a result of the aspiration of stomach contents while unconscious due to the application of halcyon and halothane. Who applied the halothane to Tammy Homolka's face?
Karla Homolka.
His other hypothesis is that she could have died from asphyxia due to smothering during the application of some fluid to the face. Who applied the halothane to Tammy Homolka's face?
Karla Homolka.
What he's suggesting is that Karla Homolka did stop the breath of her sister.
I don't think that's what he's saying.
6 weeks after Tammy's death, Karla wrote this letter to a friend.
Dear Deb, fuck my parents. First they took away half the wedding money, then they kicked us out. My father doesn't even want us to have a wedding anymore. Screw that. We're having a good time. If my father wants to sit at home and be miserable, he's welcome to. He's only worked a day since Tammy died. He's wallowing in his own misery and fucking me.
It's just appalling. It appears to me to be absolutely callous and totally unconcerned about the fact that her sister had died significantly through her own actions only a couple of months earlier. She doesn't care that her father is grieving about the loss of his daughter. This is really quite a shocking thing.
And there's no remorse in there about Tammy. I mean, it's just...
There's no remorse about Tammy in this letter whatsoever.
Do you wish you'd seen that before?
Sure I do.
But does it make you more concerned about what might have been going on inside the head of that young woman?
It may have made it a little easier for her to be a perfect follower for this particular sadist, because she's already along that direction herself.
Dear Christy, I'm cooperating with the police fully. They're being very nice to me and treating me like the victim I am.
God, it feels weird to be back in here.
The victim was matter-of-fact when she toured police through her Bayview Avenue home where 2 teenagers were murdered. She had chosen to dress as a schoolgirl. Homolka's response to being back in one of the rooms where Leslie Mahaffy was attacked was to ask police about her furniture.
Can you answer a question for me? Was any of the furniture damaged as a result of the investigation?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, good, sorry, I'm asking for it.
And upstairs in the bathroom where they cleansed Kristen French's body of evidence, Homolka inquired after her perfume samples.
But I don't have any of that stuff.
So where are all those articles now?
Where Paul's lawyer took them.
You're saying Paul's lawyer took a number of articles from you?
Well, from what I understand, his lawyer took basically everything. This is where we carried Leslie down the stairs.
And in the basement where Leslie Mahaffy was dismembered, she had yet another inquiry on behalf of her other sister, Lori.
Can I ask you a question?
I'm afraid I can't answer.
Can I have that book? My sister wants it. Or does that have to stay here?
That has to stay for now, but we can make those arrangements.
Okay, thank you. And my Christmas tree.
In July 1993, Karla began serving her sentence at P4W in a segregated cell surrounded by her favorite cartoon characters. 3 months into it, Homolka claimed she remembered another assault. She wrote to her lawyer about a victim we'll call Jane Doe.
Dear George, hi, I'm having a major problem. I've remembered something else. Paul raped Jane Doe, a friend of mine. What I'm really afraid of is that I was more involved than I can remember. I have to tell them, but what if they nail me for this too? Can you do something to make sure they don't? Thanks, George. Karla.
Stephen Williams spent 3.5 years reviewing the evidence in this case. He says Homolka had good reason to be worried.
So just before they get married, and before Leslie Mahaffy was kidnapped, 2 weeks before, she did exactly to Jane Doe what she did to her sister, rendered her unconscious with a mixture of halothane and halcyon, and she calls her fiancé on his car phone and says, "Come home, dear, I have a surprise for you."
Stream close up. Whoa.
The surprise was the girl in this video shot by Homolka hours before the assault. It was the first of 2 assaults and the one that was Homolka's idea. But she only told police about the second assault, which happened months later and which Bernardo initiated. 16 months after Homolka's deal, Bernardo's original counsel finally turned over important evidence against his client. Videotapes documenting the sexual assaults of Tammy Homolka, Leslie Mahaffy, and Kristen French. As evidence against Bernardo, they were as good as a smoking gun, but they also exposed something sinister about Karla Homolka. In many cases, she appeared to be enjoying herself as she took her turn sexually assaulting the couple's young victims, including Jane Doe. The tapes also suggested Karla's memory lapse about Jane Doe might have been one of convenience, that she might be guilty of perjury and another sexual assault. The Crown's star witness was in trouble, so another psychologist was brought in, all the way from California. Homolka had showed a remarkable facility for detail, but Dr. Chris Hatcher said she had a form of amnesia as a result of the abuse she'd suffered, and the Crown accepted that Homolka had genuinely forgotten about the Jane Doe assault in June. Even so, she'd committed the assault, and former Crown prosecutor Mary Hall thought she should be charged with, among other things, attempted murder.
She could have died. I mean, they did the same thing to Jane that they did to Tammy Homolka, and we all know that Tammy Homolka died.
It does seem, based on the evidence, that Ms. Homolka was driving that train, that she initiated the assault.
Quite frankly, her evidence was the same on everything, wasn't it? That Paul made me do it.
Senior Crown attorneys met several times to determine Homolka's fate. They decided that although they could charge her with the assault on Jane Doe, that it was in the public interest not to do so now. In this letter to Inspector Vince Bevan, the Attorney General's office explains their decision, saying that charges might suggest that Homolka's initial sentence was inadequate, and charges would also reduce Homolka's effectiveness as a witness. Everybody said you wouldn't have made the deal with Ms. Homolka if you didn't have the videotapes.
Mm-hmm.
Now it looks like she's broken the deal, and you've got the videotapes, don't you?
Yes.
And yet you went ahead and made another deal.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't needed as a witness anymore.
Yeah.
The Crown says that there's little doubt that she would feel she'd been unfairly dealt with if she'd been charged. Who cares what she thinks?
Yeah. Oh, I agree with you.
What does that say about the Crown's relationship with Karla Homolka?
I don't know. I can't fill you in on that.
Well, you're smiling, but does that disturb you? I mean, you got that letter initially.
Going back to the earlier part of our conversation, did I say I agreed with the advice?
But you didn't charge her, and you could have.
No. Yeah. There is further information that if a charge was laid, it would not be proceeded with.
By the Crown.
By the Crown.
Mary Hall suggests the Crown could have handled Homolka very differently.
There's another way of dealing with an accomplice who gives evidence, and that is to try to distance the prosecution from the witness and actually treat that witness with a certain amount of disdain, that members of the jury, I'm sorry I have to call this kind of evidence, but we do, and call it.
And not wrapping them in this fuzzy blanket of being a victim.
Yes.
In the sense that she was a victim too.
I had some difficulty putting Karla Homolka on that same level as what I believe were the true victims.
In the summer of 1995, Karla Homolka testified against Paul Bernardo at his trial. Bernardo's lawyer was John Rosen.
I would pound her with terrible stuff, and she would get stronger and stronger and stronger. And at the end of it, no one in that room or anybody following that trial would ever have believed that she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, or that she was a battered spouse, or that she didn't have the intestinal fortitude to walk out and blow the whistle and save herself, never mind the victims.
Because the tougher you got, the stronger she got?
Exactly. Exactly. And so the facade was of the victim, of the battered Karla, was stripped away, and the true tough little girl from St. Catharines was revealed.
In March of 1996, Justice Patrick Galligan published what was meant to be the last word on what was termed a distasteful but necessary alliance between the Crown and Karla Homolka. He agreed prosecutors behaved properly in not charging her with the attack on Jane Doe, saying, among other things, that it would have damaged her credibility as a witness against Paul Bernardo. It would be saying, he wrote, her credibility was not worth supporting in the first place, a point on which Homolka's critics might agree. Justice Galligan and all of the Crown attorneys who supported Homolka's deal declined our requests for interviews, as did the Crown psychiatrist, citing a confidentiality agreement the Crown is still enforcing. If Homolka wasn't the victim the Crown said she was, then who was she? One psychiatrist who examined Homolka said she was the perfect female accomplice. Because of her plea bargain, her role in the deaths of the girls was never fully explored. Invisible Darkness, a book by Stephen Williams, examines what he believes is the true nature of Karla Homolka.
I think she was desperately afraid of getting caught and desperately afraid of going to jail. The motivation for these murders, everyone agrees, was not sexual. The only possible motivation was to conceal crimes. There's no one who disagrees with that. What the Crown wants us to believe is that it was Paul Bernardo who was the murdering force who wanted these girls dead.
And you think?
And I think that it's exactly the opposite, because Paul Bernardo had no history of killing anyone to conceal his crimes. He didn't think he would ever get caught.
I said, well, we have to go to my parents for Easter dinner. And he said, well, why don't we just not go? And I said, well, I don't think it would look very good. I mean, we're supposed to go to my parents for Easter dinner and we don't go. And I said, well, how's it going to look if, you know, this girl's missing and we have no alibi? We haven't gone anywhere, we haven't done anything. And he said, well, I guess you're right. And because he wanted to keep her for longer. And I didn't want to. Like, I was going to work. I didn't want to go to work knowing that this girl was in my house and she could escape so easily. And I was afraid. So I didn't suggest to him that we kill her on Sunday. But I knew that she had to be gone.
When Paul Bernardo was alone with numerous victims and had the opportunity, he never killed any of them. The only time that people ended up dead is when Paul was in the presence of his wife. I don't know who did the killing. I do know, however, that women and men are equally capable of doing evil and doing wrong, and that in this particular instance, I'm not so certain that that fact was appreciated.
It was justice served, in your view, in this
Yes.
case. 3 dead girls.
Yes. 3 dead girls.
She could have helped them and didn't.
Yes.
Involved in the death of her sister.
Mm-hmm.
Could have stopped it. Didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Is that justice, what she got?
Well, do you want to talk in terms of retribution? I know I'll be criticized for it, but I do believe that justice was served.
So does Karla Homolka, who will be released from prison less than 4 years from now under mandatory supervision. She's considered a model prisoner and, according to her psychiatric reports, poses no danger to the public.
He was already talking about going out and doing it again. And I said, there's no way I'm going through another murder again, no way. The lease on the car was running out. My parents were going to co-sign a loan for $10,000. I was going to do something before that loan was co-signed and before he made me go with him to murder another girl. There was no way I was going to go through either of those events.